everybody. Please come fill in some seats. I know we have got a lot of folks that are in town from small, rural cities that are here kind of talking to congressmen. So welcome everybody. This is Senator Kevin Cramer. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. For those who may not know, we are from not only the same state of North Dakota, but the same hometown.
We are.
And just, I was telling him backstage that I actually was in the pep band for one of your first state races, so we go way back.
I ran for Congress in 1996 against Earl Pomeroy, the only House seat from North Dakota, and lost. But I kicked off my campaign at the Kindred High School gymnasium, and it was a packed crowd, and somehow in those days, the superintendent allowed all of the students to witness it if they wanted to. And who would rather do that than go to class? I don't know, just all of them. But yeah, that was a cool day.
All right, we are gonna talk about we are gonna be talking about small business and rural America. But first I wanna ask kind of two questions. We've had a lot of conversations about government funding. The House is going to be voting later today on it. It's going to go to the Senate. I assume you are yes for this package. You think it gets done Thursday, Friday for the Senate? I feel like the jet fumes are coming fast.
Well, I think it could get done really quickly as long as there's full cooperation. You all know the intricacies of the Senate and all the easy barriers. All the ways to hold up the agenda. It takes consent to move quickly. You're right, there are jet fumes. You're right, we've been here, 9 weeks in a row, and now that there's finally one that we don't have to be. Funding the government is a high priority for most members. It's a high priority more for Democrats than it is for Republicans, generally speaking. That said, we are living in a different political world, and I hardly dare be optimistic, to be honest, because even if we had 52 of the 53 Republicans on board, and I'm a yes vote, a grudging yes vote. I don't vote for a lot of CRs, certainly not long-term ones. But when you consider that, was it last week that Democrats voted 100% against Tommy Tuberville's Title IX bill protecting women in sports? They're capable. They're capable of making a statement, making a stand. I hope that they don't. I hope that they look at it and go, as imperfect as this is, it's better than a shutdown. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
As imperfect as this is, and it is imperfect in lots of ways, both for conservatives and liberals, no, it's better than a shutdown, and let's put 2025 in the rearview mirror. At least from a funding standpoint.
All right, well, we will have to see, to your point, if they make it easy or painful for you. There's a lot of talk about how the Trump administration is looking to cut red tape, a lot of focus on DOJ. Are you worried that it's going too far? We've heard some members say, listen, I want to cut waste, fraud and abuse, but I want to be able to say in North Dakota, here's where things should be cut. It shouldn't be coming on from down high.
I think it had to happen. I think that not only have the last 4 years been sort of outrageous, I mean, let's not forget, speaking of the CR, part of the reason we have a CR today is because although the Appropriations Committee passed out 11 of the 12 appropriations bills by the end of July, not a one of them was brought to the Senate floor. So we have this problem that's not just recent, but decades of waste, fraud, and abuse that's sort of been tolerated by both political parties, Congress, as well as the administrations. And we suddenly have a president who wants to fix it all in one term. And so I think it kind of had to happen. I'm not as concerned about it as some of my colleagues are, but I'm less concerned because now that the president's own cabinet has pushed back a little bit and said, hey, we'll take it from here. Thank you very much, Elon. Thanks for the great ideas, I really do think you're going to see what you often see from Donald Trump is an impulse followed by a moderation of pace and things. But at the same time, I don't think he wants to take the foot too much off the accelerator. So I think we ride it out. And I also think that it'll correct course fairly quickly.
So obviously North Dakota is a rural agriculture state. Tariffs are of concern oftentimes to farmers. How concerned are you about what is happening on the tariff front with this administration?
Yeah, so again, I'm not overly concerned. I mean, retaliation sucks, right? But But one thing about any type of a war, whether it's a tariff war, trade war, a gun war, if you're going to start one, you better be able to win it. And I think one of the things Donald Trump understands really well is, as the largest consuming nation in the world by far, he has all the ammunition, he has the leverage, and I don't expect a lot of these other countries to push back for very long, because I think the pain on them is going to be worse than it is on us. Having said that, the last Trump administration did something similar, particularly with China. North Dakota, you're right, is an ag-producing state. Soybeans are a really big crop for us. Although, since then, North Dakota has built not one, but two, with a third on the way, soybean crushing plant, and we've converted an oil refinery into a renewable fuels refinery, diesel refinery that uses soybean oil. So we're creating our own markets as a necessity from what happened previously. At the same time, Donald Trump did provide some extra funding for farmers to get them through that rough patch. I hope that doesn't become necessary. The other thing I would just say is I think he's on the right track in terms of the big, bold statements up front, followed by some moderation. Canada is a great example. The town we grew up in at that time had like 500 people. So when we talk rural, we're talking real rural, okay? Canada, being so close to North Dakota, I'm very active with the Canadian Embassy and with premiers and Canadian businesses, understand the intricacies of the supply chain, all of that. I think as the USMCA, for example, condition as a waiver was a really good idea that emphasizes rule of law, and if you stick to the agreement, you're good. Let's make a better agreement. I just think you're going to start seeing a lot of behavior change and some things move quicker than they even did last time. We'll see if in April and May I can say the same thing.
TBD, I will come back to you then.
I know you know where to find me.
All right, well, I know we have a lot of folks here in the audience who are in town from across the country representing small business owners in rural America. We've got, you represent North Dakota, as we've said, a very rural state. Why is it important, do you think, to invest in small businesses? So
I just thought, as you were talking, I just thought of an anecdote from the years I was economic development and finance director in North Dakota, which was really more at that point more of a promotion agency. We'd had a banker for 4 years prior to that. I was the tourism director. Ed Schaefer was the governor, and he brought me in and said, "We're going to make you economic development director." And I said, "What I know about finance, you could tap into a small thimble." He said, "We've had a banker for 4 years, now we need a promoter," which it's part of why Mike Crapo asked me to be on the banking committee. I'm sorry, are you sure you want to think about this? But I'm on the banking committee. It's really important for this reason. Ed Schaefer taught me something really important. There was a town smaller than Kindred in western North Dakota who was using some of the state financing programs for a hardware store. Now, for those of you who understand primary business versus a local retailer, you know that a local retailer doesn't redistribute new money, they just redistribute old money, the same money that's already in the community. And so we were focused on new wealth coming from out of state or somewhere else. Anyway, that was our charge. But he said to me, "That's not our charge. That was previous administration's charge. Our charge is to help every small town." And the reason is this. He said, "The diversity of the economy and of these small towns adds to the value of the entire country." And he said, if all that a loan or a grant to a hardware store in a small community, that's the small community's decision. That's not the state's decision. Our decision is to support their decision. And he said, if nothing else, that small town lasts for another year. They're the moral compass of this country. Isn't that awesome? I thought, what an understanding. And I thought, I don't feel so bad about not knowing anything about finance anymore, because we have a higher calling, and that is to be the moral compass for the country, and our small towns are key to that. The other thing I would say, Anna, is that if you don't have a small town infrastructure every few miles, in North Dakota, for example, the railroad decided where towns would be. And they just happened to be every 9 miles along the railroad. And the reason for that is because that's how far a farmer could move their load of grain by horse and wagon and get it to market, to the local elevator. So they literally threw lumber off every 9 miles. Well, we don't take grain to market with a horse and wagon anymore. there is nonetheless a farm economy that feeds a hungry world that is crucial to the entire country. I mean, you do not get good pasta in New York City without really good durum wheat from North Dakota. You just can't. We've grown 90% of it.
Yeah.
And so you have to have an infrastructure that makes all of that happen. You can't reserve, for example, 350 miles of Interstate 94 from Fargo to Medora for gravel and still get that durum wheat where it needs to get so it becomes pasta in New York City. So it's a big, beautiful country that requires all of us, and rural America needs investment as much as any place for the sake of the country.
So we were in Bismarck, actually, in 2023. We did an event with the now governor, Kelly Armstrong, where Goldman Sachs announced it was investing $100 million in rural small businesses. You ran kind of the state economic driver for North Dakota. What does that kind of an investment, that $100 million, mean for a state like North Dakota?
Well, it's huge. Obviously, it's huge for anybody that is a recipient of a grant from that $100 million, but it's more than that. You know, when Dave Solomon told me that he was doing this, I thought, wow, because it's inspirational besides just financial largesse, if you will. It's encouraging, and encouraging investment attracts, more importantly, other investment. Yeah. Plus, it takes full advantage of other assets we have. You know, some of you may know this, but North Dakota has the only state-owned bank in the country. It's kind of remarkable. We have likewise, we have a state-owned elevator that processes this durum wheat into semolina and other flours, because we were tired of the big banks in Minneapolis and the General Mills of the world in Minneapolis. I say we, it was long before my time. And so our way to combat that was our own bank and our own mill and elevator. Well, that strain of populism is what was very attractive to people like Theodore Roosevelt. Mm-hmm. That's why his presidential library is going to be in North Dakota. Populism was cool in North Dakota way before Donald Trump came along. Now, our version of it's a little different. So I think something like what Goldman Sachs did for North Dakota, it cements Goldman Sachs, for one thing, in a state that it hadn't maybe had a lot of investment in prior. And it also, like I said, inspires a whole crop of entrepreneurs. The formation of capital for a startup, probably the hardest thing in the world, or for a small business. And this kind of an effort goes a long ways.
That's a great transition. So we've been around the country with Goldman Sachs since we launched in 2021, talking to small business owners in urban areas, in rural areas, and Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Voices survey, they kind of regularly survey, and their most recent one found that small businesses are concerned about, 76% said that they were concerned about access to capital, that is one of the top concerns. Is there anything that Washington can do to help facilitate that?
Well, actually, when you say facilitate, there is. I mean, there are a lot of programs. I talked about the Bank of North Dakota, and there are other state programs, but there are federal programs as well, the SBA, SBICs, Small Business Development Centers, having a university. Today I had, 20 University of North Dakota business students in my boardroom, or one of my conference rooms, to talk about small business and what attracts people to North Dakota, what attracts investment to North Dakota. And I think having the nimbleness and knowing how to use those federal tools, along with a state bank, along with somebody like a Goldman Sachs, as well as our community banks and credit unions, it's an ecosystem that can be very, very rich. One of the reason I'm on the banking committee, and the reason Mike Crapo at the time asked me to consider being on the banking committee, was when he looked at my resume, he said, we don't really have a champion for the little guy. We haven't, we know Jamie Dimon, and we know David Solomon, and we know Jane Fraser, and on, and Brian Moynihan, and these are all people I know and love and I like to help be more successful. But I like them to partner with the community banks of North Dakota in growing that whole ecosystem. Because speaking of diversity of business and communities, diversity of different access to different financial institutions, I think, is very, very helpful as well. So yeah, we can facilitate it in two ways. One, highlighting the federal programs. Yep. And two, facilitating things like like what Goldman Sachs is doing. I bring all these guys to North Dakota to show them projects.
I like it. Another kind of two other things that I think have been kind of come up a lot in these conversations is just the complexity of the tax code, right? That it needs to be simplified. We are in the early stages right now of tax reform, reconciliation. Is there any hope that things are going to get simpler?
So,
the deep sigh makes me think no.
Well, I was in the House last time we did this.
Yeah.
And the House passed, when we passed our tax package, and reconciliation tax package, we brought the code, we brought the brackets down to from 7 or 9, whatever they were, to 3. And I thought that's 2 more than we need, but I'll compromise. And then, of course, when it came over to the Senate at that time, 7 was the only way they could go. Now, I understand I understand the shock of going to 3, and there'd be people in the gray area who would be on the fringe of one of those brackets or the other, and they might get harmed. But I get all of that. I still wish we'd have done 3, just as a point to the simplicity. We did simplify it in some respects, of course. The larger standard deduction and eliminating really the need for some of the other deductions then. But it also seems like it gets much more complicated. I think the complexity of the tax code, like most regulations, is a barrier to investment, particularly small business. I think the 199A piece of that bill that we did, and the one we have to do now, is really, really important to small business pass-throughs, as you guys all understand that. The opportunity to be able to take at least 20% off the books, and I give Ron Johnson all the credit in the world. Even back then, he was legendary to me as a House member, fighting for that other part of corporate America, if you will. And so it's really, in my mind, the most important part of this reconciliation package that we're working on, whether it's a couple of them or one big, beautiful bill, is to make as much of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act permanent as we can. That's why I hope we can get enough votes to do a baseline that is based on current policy as opposed to current law, and then why I think we need to stick as close as we can to the script of the previous bill so that we can in fact have that permanency, which the other thing as I was mentioning, whether it's regulations, the complexity of the tax code or taxes themselves, that's really important obviously to capital formation is consistency.
Right.
And that would certainly provide that.
I want to shift gears a little bit. One of the themes we've been talking a lot about today is technology. We've had a lot of conversations around AI, regulation, should it be, what's the role of government there? Small business owners, and there's a lot of concern about keeping pace in the workforce, especially when it comes to AI and trying to figure out how they can kind of power their businesses that way. Only 52% of rural small businesses are using AI versus 63% of suburban small businesses or 61% of urban small businesses. So obviously there's a lag factor there. How big of a concern is it of you that some of these small businesses could be left behind, or that there needs to be more training or facilitating and access, I guess?
Well, access and training would be really, really important, because the reason, in my view, that there may be a lagging in rural communities is that there's a fear of it, right? And so if the fear keeps you from moving forward with it, you are going to probably not make it. There's a place for boutiques, but even boutiques, I think one of the best things, for example, Goldman Sachs does, one of the best things the city does in rural communities is they come out and they teach people how to do this. It's not just the money itself. Teaches boutiques how to use multiple credit cards or accept multiple credit cards, how to price for it, all those kinds of things. So I do think that's a big part of it, and perhaps the federal government ought to look at doing more of that with AI. But I'm going to tell a story, which I do best, and none of this was in my mind before I got up here. I got to be honest. You get us. When I was economic development director, it occurred to me that the reason so many farmers grew wheat was because their dad grew wheat. And he grew wheat because his dad grew wheat. And he grew wheat because, his great-grandparents grew wheat. And that bothered me so much. And pretty soon I was starting to hear from western North Dakota, Watford City especially, who had a pretty progressive small retail community saying, we have got to stop this this online shopping thing from going forward. This is awful. You know, everybody's got a website, all these, and so I wrote an op-ed. Actually, I didn't write, I'm sorry, I was speaking to the North Dakota Newspaper Association editors in Medora, North Dakota. That Medora is a little western cow town that is the gateway to Theodore Roosevelt National Park. It's now a wonderful attraction, and that's where the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library is being built. But that's where the setting for this discussion, and I warned my staff that I'm going to say something very provocative to these guys. I know that shocks those of you who are, you know, Capitol reporters, but I said, North Dakota is in a cultural rut. And I said, now let me say it again, and I'll say it slowly so you can all get the quote exactly right. We are in a cultural rut. And then I tell the grandpa story and about all the wheat farmers. And I said, I have one question about why this fear. Now, you guys, just to give you context, this is in like 2000, when was this? No, this was like in 1995 to 2000 when I was economic development director. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so the internet wasn't brand new. Al Gore had already invented it, but it was relatively new in the Great Plains, right? And so, in rural America. So I said, I want to ask this question. If, in fact, a hardware store, or back up, if, in fact, an ammunition store in Watford City, North Dakota, gets a website, and an ammunition provider in, say, Dallas, Texas, gets a website, who has access to a greater growth of market share? The Watford City person. And by the way, they have lower rent, and the stagecoach is not the way we move, you know, packages anymore. And I said, we've got to change this mindset. I think some of it is in fact cultural.
Yep.
And that's where I think the education piece comes in. But again, I met with about 20 University of North Dakota students today. Later, I met with their whole leadership team, including their president. There's lots of, as you know, tools and opportunities to help people get comfortable with AI. But at the same time, I would submit to you that AI, like a lot of other things, requires an ethical response. And this is what I always tell the students. They need us as much as they need any engineer from any university in America. They need people with a grounded ethic that can use these tools in a way that is friendly to humans as well.
All right, we are almost out of time, but I do want to give you kind of the last word, which is you speak to a lot of small business owners, obviously talk to a lot of folks in rural America. What's your message to the people who are out there kind of doing the work, entrepreneurial, starting businesses, and toughing it out in a kind of uncertain time right now in the economy?
Yeah, well, first thing I'd say is America is worth it. Hang in there. The American dream is really is alive and well as much as it's ever been. With regard to the uncertainty, you know, timing's everything. I said I ran for Congress, and you played in the pep band at my first announcement in 1996. Hard to believe, and lost, and then I lost again in 1998. Yes, I did. I lost again. I finally, you know, we finally started having victories, and here I am in the United States Senate, son of a rural electric lineman. Impossible. And I always say, I've had a lot of success and a lot of failure in politics. I've lost 3 statewide elections. The most common denominator is timing. So the point being, hang in there, ride out the cycle if you can, ask for help. I think there are some things we can do better, like providing more angel capital opportunities, you know, lifting the cap, for example, before somebody's regulated with a gift to their family member for their startup, or whatever the case might be, the type of investments. We can facilitate some of that, but ride it out, because we still have the greatest opportunity for success of any country in the world. And we have access to, and tools, and we have a government that cares, at least in places like North Dakota.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much, Senator
It's my
Cramer.
pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.